Attachment by John Bowlby is the foundation of modern relationship psychology, explaining how early bonds with parents shape personality, the ability to love, and the capacity to cope with stress. Bowlby proves that attachment is not just an emotion, but a biological instinct necessary for survival, like animals seeking protection from adults. Using examples of orphan children separated from their families, he shows how a deficit of love in childhood leads to anxiety, aggression, or emotional coldness in adult life. Interestingly, Bowlby revolutionized 20th century psychology by combining ethology, the science of animal behavior, and psychoanalysis. His ideas influenced the system of adoption and children's homes. The book was born from shock. After World War II, Bowlby studied orphan children and found that even good care without love severely damaged the psyche, a phenomenon later called hospitalism. The term attachment styles, secure, anxious, avoidant, was introduced not by Bowlby, but by his student Mary Ainsworth, who developed his theory. Part 1, the task. Rule 1, observing attachment behavior. Attachment behavior is not merely an emotional bond, but a biologically programmed survival system, similar in humans and animals. Infants cry, cling, and track their mother with their eyes, not because they are spoiled, but because evolution taught them to maintain closeness with the one who ensures safety. Observing children in hospitals and orphanages, one can notice, even with good care, without emotional contact, a child begins to wither. This phenomenon was later called hospitalism. For example, in Harlow's experiment, infant monkeys preferred a soft cloth mother who did not provide food but offered tactile comfort over a wire mother with a bottle of milk. Similarly, human infants seek not only nourishment but also the warmth, smell, and voice of the mother. Attachment is a basic instinct, not a luxury or a consequence of upbringing. Rule 2, the control theory approach to behavior. To understand attachment, it must be viewed as a system of self-regulation, similar to a thermostat. The child maintains an optimal distance from the attachment figure. When the mother is far away, signals with crying. When close, calms down and explores the world. The system operates automatically. Like breathing, we don't think about how to breathe. But the body regulates the process itself. For example, a toddler playing in a sandbox glances back at their mother every 2 to 3 minutes, not because they are afraid, but to check the safe base. If the mother disappears from view, anxiety and searching behavior are activated. Attachment behavior is a complex mechanism where proximity serves as emotional fuel for development. Overall conclusion for part 1. The first part of the book lays the scientific foundation. Attachment is not a subjective feeling, but an objective behavioral mechanism shaped by evolution. Bowlby shows that the desire for closeness is as natural as hunger or thirst, and children's tantrums are not manipulation, but signals from the survival system. These chapters change the perspective on parenting, for example, explaining why the let them cry it out method can disrupt the formation of secure attachment. The main message? By meeting a child's need for contact, we are not spoiling them, but helping to develop a healthy psyche. Part 2. The natural history of attachment behavior. Rule 3. Attachment behavior. Its nature and place in the biological system. Attachment is not just a social phenomenon, but a complex biological system shaped by evolution for the survival of the species. It operates on the principle of homeostasis. When the child feels threatened, real or subjective, the attachment system is activated, forcing them to seek proximity to the protective figure. This mechanism can be observed in all mammals. Infant monkeys, calves, or human babies exhibit similar patterns of behavior under stress. For example, when a loud noise occurs in a zoo, an infant chimpanzee instantly rushes to its mother and clings to her fur. This is the exact analog of how a human child clings to a parent's leg when meeting a stranger. Our need for attachment is programmed by nature, deeper than cultural norms of upbringing. Rule 4. The development of attachment behavior in humans. The formation of attachment goes through 4 phases, from the newborn's complete dependence, to the complex system of internal working models of relationships in the adolescent. In the first months, the infant does not distinguish between people, but by 6 to 9 months, they develop selective attachment, a preference for the primary caregiver. The critical period for the formation of secure attachment is from 6 months to 3 years, when the brain is particularly sensitive to emotional interactions. For example, a 9-month-old girl who smiled at all adults yesterday suddenly starts crying at the sight of strangers. This is not a tantrum, but an important developmental stage showing that the ability to distinguish own from stranger has formed. Attachment develops according to predictable biological laws that cannot be ignored without consequences for the psyche. Rule 5. Changes in attachment behavior over the life cycle. The attachment system does not disappear with age. It transforms. In adults, it manifests in romantic relationships, friendships, and even attachment to places or pets. However, the basic style, secure, anxious, or avoidant, formed in childhood, continues to influence all significant bonds. Interestingly, in moments of crisis, illness, loss, even adults often regress to childhood attachment behavior patterns. For example, a 40-year-old man, usually independent, starts calling his mother several times a day during a serious illness. This is not weakness, but the activation of the ancient attachment system in conditions of vulnerability. We never outgrow the need for attachment. We just learn to satisfy it in more complex ways. Overall, conclusion for part 2. In this section, Bowlby presents attachment as a continuous biopsychological process that permeates the entire human life from infancy to old age. The main paradox: the more secure the early attachment, the more independent the person becomes. These chapters explain why developing independence through premature separation from parents often yields the opposite effect: anxiety and dependence in adult relationships. The key idea: by satisfying a child's need for security today, we create the foundation for their healthy autonomy tomorrow. Part 3. The formation of emotional bonds. Rule 6. Conditions favoring the development of attachment. Secure attachment is formed through the consistency and responsiveness of the adult. When the parent regularly and predictably responds to the child's signals, crying, smiling, need for contact, the baby develops an inner confidence in the availability of the close person. Ideal reactions are not what matters, but the overall balance the child must feel that their needs will generally be met. For example, a mother who picks up her crying child 70% of the time and calmly explains that she is busy 30% of the time fosters healthier attachment than one who rushes at the first call, then ignores the child for hours. The quality of attachment is determined not by the amount of time together, but by the emotional availability of the parent. Rule 7. Disturbances in the formation of attachment. Anxious and avoidant attachment arise when the child cannot develop a stable strategy for receiving care. With the anxious type, children become clingy. With the avoidant type, they pretend not to need closeness. These patterns persist in adult relationships. Some constantly check on their partner, others distance themselves at the slightest threat of intimacy. For example, a woman who grew up with a cold mother may, in marriage, either demand constant confirmation of love from her husband reproducing the childhood, hunger for warmth, or fundamentally refuse to discuss feelings, as she learned in childhood. Attachment style is an adaptation to specific upbringing conditions, not an innate character trait. Rule 8. The disruption of attachment. Separation from the attachment figure triggers a universal chain of reactions: protest, despair, detachment. In children, this process is particularly destructive. Prolonged separation from the mother can lead to emotional freezing. Interestingly, even adults going through the loss of a loved one go through the same stages, albeit in a more complex form. For example, a child in the hospital first cries loudly and calls for the mother, protest, then falls into apathy, despair, and with the parent's long absence, begins to treat them as strangers. This mechanism Bowlby observed in children evacuated during the war. The consequences of attachment disruption can be mitigated, but not completely avoided, which is why prevention of unnecessary separations is so important. Overall conclusion for part 3. These chapters present attachment as a living process that can both strengthen the psyche and traumatize it. The main discovery: the quality of our adult relationships is largely determined not by conscious decisions, but by the invisible patterns formed in the first years of life. However, Bowlby emphasizes, while early experience is important, it is not fatal. Understanding the mechanisms of attachment provides a chance for correction of even deeply ingrained behavioral models. Practical advice: when noticing anxious or avoidant patterns in yourself, it is worth viewing them not as personal flaws, but as the consequence of once necessary, but now obsolete survival strategies. Part 4. Development of the theory. Rule 9. Alternative theoretical approaches. Bowlby critically analyzes the theories of child development existing in his time, showing their limitations. Psychoanalysis is too focused on the child's fantasies, behaviorism on external stimuli, ignoring internal needs. His attachment theory offers a golden mean. It takes into account both the biological basis and subjective experience. For example, if a behaviorist explains a child's crying as a conditioned reflex for receiving food, and a psychoanalyst as a manifestation of oral fixation, attachment theory will see it as an evolutionary mechanism for maintaining contact with a protector. No single theory can fully explain the complexity of human relationships, but Bowlby's approach covers the most essential aspects. Rule 10. Instinctive behavior alternative models. Here, the author delves into ethological parallels, showing that attachment behavior is part of a broader system of instincts. He compares human models with the behavior of birds and mammals, demonstrating universal biological patterns. Special attention is paid to feedback, how the child's behavior influences the parent's reactions. For example, a mother duck starts leading her ducklings only after they start following her. Similarly, a human mother becomes more caring when she sees the baby's reciprocal reaction. Attachment is a two-way process where both participants mutually regulate each other's behavior. Rule 11. Attachment behavior. Its place in the system of instinctive behavior. Bowlby integrates his theory into the general system of human instincts, showing its connection with exploratory behavior, fear, and aggression. He describes how these systems balance when attachment is activated, exploratory activity temporarily decreases, and vice versa. For example, a child in an unfamiliar environment first clings tightly to the mother, attachment activation. Then, assured of her availability, begins to explore the space, exploratory behavior activation. Healthy development requires flexible switching between different behavioral systems depending on the situation. Overall, conclusion for part 4. In this section, Bowlby expands attachment theory beyond a narrow specialization, showing its interdisciplinary value. The main breakthrough is the consideration of human relationships through the prism of evolutionary biology, which gives the theory scientific rigor. These chapters are especially important for specialists, as they demonstrate how attachment theory fills gaps in psychoanalysis and behaviorism. Practical significance. Understanding the biological basis helps separate cultural stereotypes of upbringing from the true needs of the child. As Bowlby shows, many behavior problems are actually natural instinctive reactions that should not be suppressed, but skillfully guided. Part 5. Further development of the theory. Rule 12. The significance of attachment theory for psychopathology. Early attachment experience forms vulnerability or resilience to mental disorders. Disturbed relationships with parents create a risk of depression, anxiety disorders, and borderline states in adulthood. Secure attachment acts as a buffer against stress. People with such experience cope better with crises. For example, a patient with borderline personality disorder who experienced frequent separations from his mother in childhood demonstrates extremes in adult relationships, either idealizing his partner or sharply rejecting them at the slightest sign, distance. Many mental problems are not an illness in the classic sense, but a consequence of disrupted attachment relationships. Rule 13. The significance of attachment theory for psychotherapy. Therapeutic relationships can compensate for deficits of early attachment. A secure alliance with a therapist creates conditions for a corrective emotional experience. Approaches that consider attachment are especially effective when the therapist is consistently available but not intrusive. For example, a client with avoidant attachment, who initially is late for sessions and doubts the therapy methods, gradually learns to trust through the therapist's constant reliability. Conclusion: psychotherapy works when it recreates the conditions for the formation of secure attachment. Overall conclusion for part 5. The final section shows the practical value of the theory, from understanding the origins of mental disorders to modern therapy methods. Bowlby proves the quality of our first relationships affects physical and mental health throughout life. But the main message is optimistic. Even negative attachment patterns can be changed through new, meaningful relationships, whether in therapy, partnership, or friendship. The book concludes with an important thought. The human psyche is plastic, and attachment remains our need and resource at any age. This is such a wonderful book. I've compiled a separate list of all the important theses from this book, along with all the techniques and tools, and created a step-by-step action plan that you can immediately implement in your life. You can get all this in my community, Place of Power. There, you will find a detailed text analysis with similar lists for each book being reviewed. The community has already thoroughly analyzed and made available to you hundreds of world bestsellers, with a new analysis released every day. Follow the link in the description and use it.